Let's jump to the war here, and today we're doing a top 5 best features of Borderlands 3 video from a newbie's perspective. So the other week I had the privilege to get flown down to Sydney by 2K ANZ to play Borderlands 3, and I was fortunate enough to be able to capture a few hours of gameplay. And from that gameplay, I've got a list of 5 features that I thoroughly enjoyed whilst playing the game. So let's get in now to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is that Borderlands 3 is actually quite challenging from a newbie's perspective. Now, a week ago from now, I hadn't played a Borderlands game. But I've had a chance to play both Borderlands 2 and number 3, and I'm going to be comparing my gameplay of those two. Now, when I played Borderlands 2, I certainly died a few times. You know, got shot in the face, made a few mistakes, didn't duck enough, was a bit too ballsy in some of the fights, and got myself killed. But I didn't die anywhere near as much as I did in Borderlands 3. And it was largely due to the fights and the battles being a lot more hectic, and even the environment itself trying to kill me. There was one particular boss fight, which I think most of the people at this event really struggled with. Some people managed to get through it no problem, because they were clearly a lot better than the rest of us. But a couple of us had a really hard time with this particular boss against this guy named Mouthpiece. I personally died about 5 or 6 times against this guy, but the thing about it, it wasn't simply a case of, oh, I just didn't have good enough equipment or anything like that. It was a case of the environment itself was trying to kill me, and on the first time I fought it, I didn't even realize what the triggers were for these boombox things that would actually explode and bring you down to near death. But as I continued to fight, and as I continued to die, I started to improve my strategies and tactics against the guys until finally I was able to get just enough in order to kill him. But like I said, it took like 5 or 6 times, and it took a level up as well, but it was largely due to learning what was going on. And these were some of the things that just weren't really present in Borderlands 2, and so that was just a bit of added challenge to the game, which I actually really enjoyed in hindsight. Let's now move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is that your characters are more mobile and have more agility in Borderlands 3 than they have in previous Borderlands titles. Now, you've always been able to run around and jump, and battles and gunfights have been fairly fast-paced. But in Borderlands 3, they really crank it up to 150, and the fighting's even faster. But they give you the tools that you need in order to counter that, because you're able to climb up on obstacles, whereas previously you weren't able to. Previously, you'd have to be able to jump it, and if you couldn't jump it, well, you just have to go around it. Now, if you can just reach it, you can get up and, gain some high ground or find some new cover. But I felt that more importantly was the ability to slide. So by running and diving, essentially, you were able to move in a certain direction whilst also turning around and shooting whilst going in essentially the opposite direction. And I can't express how many times this technique saved my ass, because I have a tendency of not seeking cover until I'm down to about 10 health. And by that point it's usually too late, especially on Borderlands 2. But in this, when you get to that point and you're like, oh, quick, gotta slide in to whatever crack, cover, anything that you can get to stop the bullets flying just for a few seconds so that the shield can recover, but still get the chance to get a couple of extra shots in, it does make a big difference, and it did save my ass quite a few times. So overall, I found that the mobility and agility of the characters was greatly improved upon, and it was something that I think really improved the gameplay on Borderlands 3. Let's move on now to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is that your characters are going to have more abilities now than ever before. In previous Borderlands, using as an example, when I was playing Borderlands 2, I played as Salvador, the Gunzerker, the tank. And whilst, I've found it to be fine. He only had one ability, which was the Gunzerker ability, which you're going to be using that a lot in Borderlands 2. But when I was using Flak in Borderlands 3, I had a lot more abilities to choose from right at the get-go, and more that could be unlocked as you go along. Now, he's got his pet that goes alongside of him, but he also had another special ability in which he sort of magically conjures up specific creatures to essentially act as a kind of missile launcher. And at first I thought it just didn't do much. But then when I got the hang of it, I realized that it was incredibly useful. And I was doing things such as hiding behind cover and shooting directly upwards, and these homing missiles would kill the enemies that were hitting me. So it was really quite tactical, and I learned new ways to use them all the time. And it actually ended up being one of my most used weapons. In fact, sometimes I wouldn't even use my gun in a fight. I'd just conjure up my beasts and do its thing. So the abilities not only were being used all the time, just like in previous Borderlands titles, but there were more of them, which made the game so much more interesting because I had more tactical tools at my disposal, and that's what I like to see. Let's now move on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 are the different co-op modes available in Borderlands 3. So in previous Borderlands titles, you can play with up to 4 people. And generally speaking, when you go up against like a boss or something that drops a whole bunch of loot, it's possible for one of your friends to just come in there and grab the whole bunch of it like the greedy shit that he is. Now, in Borderlands 3, that can still happen, but if you hate the fact that that can happen, well, there's now a new mode available for you. Now, there's co-op mode and there's co-opetition. Now, co-opetition, you're still on each other's side, but it's just the same as what it was previously. You go in, grab all the loot you can, screw your friends. But in co-op mode, the way it works is that if a boss dies, or just anyone dies and drops some loot, it is separate loot for each player that's playing. So if you go up and grab all the loot that's there as soon as something dies, well, it turns out that you just can't see what your friend can see, because they can also grab a separate bunch of loot for themselves. And that then makes for a little bit more of a fair experience. Which I guess is a little bit... I guess it's a little bit more noob-friendly. So you don't have one person just completely missing out on all the loot all the time. Which really shouldn't have happened in the first place. Now, in my time playing in Sydney, I got a chance to play with the Cayinator. And we were playing with just the cooperation mode. So, I was getting loot, he was getting loot. Neither of us were able to steal each other's loot as soon as a boss dropped. And it was a lot of fun. This was my first time playing a cooperative experience in the Borderlands games. It was so much fun, in fact, that as soon as I got home from Sydney, I got another copy of Borderlands 2 to give to my wife, and then subsequently we played on stream and off stream. It was a lot of fun. So, highly recommend the cooperative modes on Borderlands 3. Let's now move on to number 1. Taking the number 1 spot for the best feature that I found in Borderlands 3 was just the loot. Now, apparently there's over 1 billion gun variations, and whilst I'm sure some of them are pretty damn similar, or even close to identical, there did seem to be an overall greater variety of weapon types. And after a big fight, there'd just be shit everywhere to pick up. Which is great for a kleptomaniac like myself, I like to get everything I can, head over to a vendor, and sell all of that crap for as much money as I can get. Which is great, because I tend to die a lot, so I need a constant supply of guns in order to pay my revive costs. Now, the main reason I needed to revive myself a lot is because of the boss fights. And it just so happened that when I did manage to beat those bosses, despite dying like 4 or 5 times, they did seem to drop more loot, which overall sort of paid my medical bills. So that's my top 5 list from my short time playing Borderlands 3. I'm certainly interested in playing it more when it comes out a month from now. Let me know in the comments if you want me to cover more Borderlands 3. Once again, big thanks to 2K ANZ for flying me down to Sydney for the day. See you next time, fuckers.